My wild card prediction failed in the most epic way possible, as both Kick Sauber drivers finished last, 19th and 20th, and I had them getting their first points of the season. This is Turn 1. We're your host, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
Guys, we're going to be reviewing and recapping the 2024 Dutch Grand Prix, one of Max Verstappen's 3 home races, where he had quite the interesting day. But Jeremiah, kick us off. Take us through the race.
We'll get to the Red Bull part, but I want to focus on a couple things first. For one, Mercedes looked off, and I'll tell you why. So Toto Wolff went on and said that he thought that the upgrades that they had done to the floorboard, which, by the way, they had these upgrades when they did Spa, but they ditched them in FP1 because they didn't like the results that they were getting, so they chose to go without them, and then they won that race. So summer break happens, they come back and they're like, we're definitely going to put these floorboards on. And they have zero pace whatsoever as George starts 4th, falls all the way back down to 7th, 8th. No, 7th. That's right.
Yeah, George is 7th.
Lewis Hamilton has a terrible qualifying, starts way back. So I believe it's 14th, right?
Yep.
Makes his way all the way up to 8th, which good on Lewis Hamilton. He had a heck of a day, passing plenty of cars, awesome fights. He went out on the softs, made them last just as long as the mediums, which was awesome. Then he went to the hards and had a pretty decent stint, went back at him. I thought he was going to pass George at the end there. And frankly, that would have been hilarious considering George started 4th. But he didn't get the job done. He lost the tires there at the end, obviously, because he'd been running on them for a while. But you get a 7th and an 8th for the Mercedes team. Ferrari looked insane. I don't know where their pace came from, but they were attacking, they were passing, they were making moves, and Charles Leclerc takes that 3rd spot on the podium, which was awesome. And they honestly looked like that throughout the entirety of the race. It wasn't even like this last-minute push at the end. No, they were making moves the entire race. In fact, at one point, Charles Leclerc went for the undercut on Oscar Piastri and ended up getting the undercut on Oscar Piastri and George Russell and takes off. So that was amazing to see from Ferrari. I don't know what improvements they did to the car. Whatever they did, it worked. And with us going to Italy, I believe it's Italy next in Monza. I could be wrong on that. I know it's one of the next ones that are coming up. I'm excited to see. I hope you do some research on that while I'm sitting here talking. I'm excited to see what they do. I want to see if they do bring even more upgrades, even more pace, maybe bring the fight back to McLaren. But right now, I would say they're bringing the fight to Red Bull, which is crazy. McLaren looked on fire today. But we've had this conversation in the past where we talked about Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri and their differences. I'd still say they're not on the same pace whatsoever. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So Oscar's good. Oscar's going to be great. We've had this kind of same conversation every time that we've seen Lando severely outperform him. Don't get us wrong. Oscar's not a bad driver here. Lando has reached that upper level of drivers. Jeremiah and I were talking before we hit record on this episode. Who are the 3, still young but elite level drivers that are chasing down Max Verstappen? And the conversation was always Charles and George, and Lando was there before this year, but he didn't have any race wins, and McLaren really never gave him a car that could compete with the Mercedes or the Ferrari or the Red Bull. I think Lando has now entered that position of being better than both Charles and George Russell, just in terms of driving. There's a car debate, there's equal machinery debates that could happen, but in terms of skill, with what we're seeing Lando crank out over the past 6 or 7 Grand Prix, he's an elite level driver approaching Max Verstappen. Now, I still think Max is the best driver in the grid. So throwing Oscar in that mix is a little bit unfair because I think Oscar is still behind all of those guys, right? He's still behind George. He's still behind Charles. Doesn't have a legit race win. He's got a sprint win, right? But not a Grand Prix win.
No, he has a Grand Prix win, but it was handed to him.
Oh, yeah. He's got the team orders thing. Sorry, he does have a win. But that should have been Lando's win. Lando should have 3 career F1 victories now instead of 2. So I don't know. I agree with you. I think Lando is just on another level, and I think we saw that as he finishes 23 seconds ahead of Max almost, and 30 seconds ahead of his teammate.
I mean, exactly that. I mean, we saw Oscar Piastri trying to bring the fight for that third podium spot, wasn't able to get it done. Meanwhile, Lando Norris is just charging ahead, like you said, 23 seconds ahead of Max. I mean, and on top of that, Lando goes for the fastest lap on the final lap on roasted tires and gets it, which is just, it just shows that Lando, like you said, is on another level right now. I would personally like to say that I had Lando as the man back when McLaren couldn't produce a car whatsoever. And I was saying it then, and I'm saying it now. If McLaren could just give him a car, he would be awesome. And now they've given him a car to fight, and he's taking it to him. I love every second of it. I want to throw it back to Ferrari here because I kind of rushed through that so that I could get to the McLaren segment, but I do want to spend some time on this. Ferrari was kind of just there for the last few races, which, you know, when I say just kind of there, they're still finishing in 6th place, 5th place, 7th place, whatever, 4th, but not really in this conversation of Red Bull, McLaren, and Mercedes, as Mercedes clearly stomped their foot that they were going to be here to stay. And with this
Well, especially over the past 5 races, especially, it's been the Mercedes and McLaren show. Ferrari hasn't had even an end to, I mean, it hasn't even been the Red Bull show anymore. It's been those 2 other teams. So it's like, where's your in to get a podium? Where's your in to get a win? It's been really tough for Ferrari.
Exactly. And, you know, you said that Oscar was battling just outside of those guys. I would agree with that. Charles Leclerc made his stomp on Oscar Piastri as he takes that 3rd spot. Oscar takes 4th. And Carlos Sainz was chomping at the bit to take Oscar down. Wasn't able to get that done whatsoever. But, you know, still, with Carlos finishing 5th, Leclerc finishing 3rd, Ferrari, I think it's safe to say that they're back in this fight. The reason I wanted to throw it back is because, like I said, I rushed through it. I wanted to get your opinion on how you felt about Ferrari right now.
They're good. I think that they're still ahead of Mercedes. Now that's tough because when you look at the last 5 Grand Prix, Mercedes won 3 of them, right? And I don't think we can call that an anomaly. I think Mercedes brought the best cars on those race weekends. But this race was different. They finished 7th and 8th. They weren't really competitive with the Ferraris or the McLarens or even the Red Bulls. They fell behind Checo, which Checo's been struggling. You got to beat Checo. At least one of your team members has to beat Checo. So the fact that they couldn't pull that off is interesting. Now, my only question here with Circuit Zandvoort and what we know about it, the bank turns, the quick turns, there's not a lot of places to build up speed except on that last bank turn where you go into the start finish straightaway. Maybe their car just wasn't designed for that, so this was kind of a weird weekend for them. Going back to Ferrari though, I don't know if they're in the same fight that McLaren and Red Bull are in. Here's where I'm looking at. Red Bull right now sits at 434 points. McLaren, after this weekend, is at 404. They are 30 points off of the Constructors' Championship lead. And then you've got to drop down 38 for additional points to get to Ferrari in 3rd. While that gap is, you could overcome that over the rest of the season, I think the McLarens of both Oscar and Lando are going to be finishing pretty regularly ahead of the Ferraris, if not both, at least one of them. And that's going to keep that lead spaced out, and it's not going to allow Ferrari to catch up. For Ferrari to catch up to McLaren and Mercedes, or sorry, to McLaren and Red Bull, they're going to have to win races. And looking at the last 9 races of the season, which, yes, next is the Italian Grand Prix, by the way. Looking at the last 9 races of the season, maybe they get 1.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they get 2. That would be best case scenarios, winning 2 races. I think Lando and McLaren are going to take a few more. I think Max is going to get a couple more. Even George and Lewis, like, it could be split. And if it's split, that does them no favors. They're going to finish the season 3rd. So while I think they are doing good, I don't think it's going to be enough to make any moves in the standings for either the drivers or the constructors, honestly.
I want to save the rest of that because I want to do another video after this where we talk about where everybody is in the season, and make sure y'all check that video out as well. I'm going to give a couple shout outs to the back of the grid here. Pierre Gasly finishing in 9th, well needed for Alpine, especially with their reputation with what it's been lately, kind of in the dump. Pierre Gasly getting ninth was definitely a win for them. Definitely needed, as he was the next car finished after you're talking about the Red Bulls, the McLarens, the Mercedes, the Ferraris. Then it's who's next after that, right? Because those are the front runners. And the very next person was Pierre Gasly. Of course, that 10th spot goes to Fernando Alonso, which well, I kind of want to save the Aston Martin talk from where they are and where they should be and yada yada for the next video here. But Fernando Alonso did look good. The big shout out there though is for Pierre Gasly. Honorable mentions: Nico Hulkenberg coming in 11th. I really thought he was going to get the job done, get some solid points. He was in 9th, gets passed by Pierre Gasly, and I was like, it's cool. No need to panic. We can still get a point out of this. And then comes Fernando Alonso, and bang, there went Nico Hulkenberg's chance at getting points, finishes in 11th. RB, not really around. Yuki Tsunoda finishes 17th. Ricardo had a decent finish when he finished in 12th, but I think if RB really wants to stamp themselves at where they say they are, they need to be getting points, if not every race, pretty frequently. And Ricardo came close with 12th, but with Yuki Tsunoda finishing 17th, he really wasn't anywhere to be found. Of course, you have the Williams drivers. They finished pretty close to each other, kind of surprising. Alex Albon in 14th and Logan Sargent in 16th. We're going to get into Logan Sargent, so y'all stay tuned for this next episode because it's going to be a good one. But looking further back on the grid, Kevin Magnussen fell way back. In fact, there was a scene that in the cooldown room when the top three drivers are staring at the screen and they just watch Kevin Magnussen all of a sudden just get passed by 4 or 5 cars, and they're like, ooh. It's like, no.
Well, and, Magnussen had to start from the pit lane too, and he was on the hards, which was, the go long strategy. And he immediately flies off the track into the gravel and ruins those hard tires. So it was worst case scenario for him. The fact that he moved up from pit lane start to 18th was actually a pretty decent day.
Absolutely. Rounding off the grid, of course, your boys, Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, the only cars to get lapped twice.
This is the worst weekend I could have made that wild card prediction, is that Chick is going to get points for the first time this season. How did they both finish 19th and 20th and they both get lapped twice?
No, it was not a good day for the Sauber boys.
Hey, real quick, I know we don't want to go too much into where all the teams are and everything, but one point I want to make is if you've been watching us for this whole season, or even if you've just been watching F1 TV or the Sky Sports broadcast, you've only heard about 4 teams. You've only heard about Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes. Don't feel bad about that. This is a weird season, and a lot of seasons are weird for their own ways, but this is a weird season in terms of points and the chase for championships. Usually you have a nice distribution of points from top to bottom. The top teams got 400, 500, 600 points, whatever, and then it scales down pretty, proportionally till you get to the bottom team that's at like 0 to 10 points, somewhere in there. This season, we don't have that. You have 4 front runners, which are your Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes. And then you have 6 backmarker teams. There's not a true midfield unless you want to consider Aston Martin the only midfield team, but even they are 202 points off of the top 4, and they're only, 40 points ahead of RB in 6th. So don't feel bad about that. I was watching the race the other day, and they mentioned Lewis Hamilton on his charge to move up from like 14th to 8th or wherever he finished. They're like, oh, and here he goes past Lance Stroll. And I was like, man, I haven't heard Lance Stroll's name in months. That includes what we've talked about. That includes the broadcast. And it's just because a lot of these drivers are irrelevant. And the difference is the top 4 teams have been making moves. They've been upgrading their cars. They've been putting their drivers in the right situations. Their strategy being nailed. The bottom 6 teams between last year and this year have gotten the majority of their decisions wrong. And we can be honest about that. And again, we'll make a video this week about those bottom 6 teams. We're starting to see some of that change with the news rolling out over the last 2 weeks, which is good. That's what needs to be happening. But those teams are not going to be able to make any significant changes. We saw that in Zandvoort this past weekend. They are not nearly on the level of those top 4 teams. That's why Jeremiah calling out Pierre Gasly and an Alpine getting 9th, huge. That's huge. That's another team outside of the top 4 getting points that hasn't really seen many points this year. Fernando Alonso getting 10th in his Aston Martin, that's still pretty big because they're not getting points every weekend. So all that to say, don't feel bad if you're neglecting the bottom 6 teams. Everybody is.
We were talking at the beginning of the season how it was almost a definite that we were going to see Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin getting points in every single race. And you were going to see 0 points from the rest of the grid unless somebody makes a mistake. And for the most part, that's played out. Aston Martin has fallen down a lot more than what we expected them to. And you're seeing stuff like Pierre Gasly getting points, Tsunoda getting points, whatever. You don't see Sauber getting points. I just like to mention that because it's funny. But it's definitely the top 4 guys switching positions constantly, and then just the rest of the grid.
Well, and there's a lot to talk about this year too. Even removing those 6 teams that are far off of the pace right now, we've had 7 race winners this year. That's enough. That's enough to care about if you're a fan of Formula One, is having that kind of parity and a chase for the championship. This goes back to the 2021 year where everybody just talked about Red Bull and Mercedes. No one cared about any other teams in 2021. It was Red Bull and Mercedes. That is very much the same right now, except it's 4-team battle instead of a 2-team battle.
If Sergio Perez won a race this season, every driver from all 4 top teams will have won a race.
And you know what? He might. There's a couple of street circuits left.
Yeah, well,
if he qualies first in Singapore, he could win.
That's not going to happen.
Azerbaijan. We still have Baku coming up. He won Baku like last year.
Who cares?
I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
I want to wrap this one back up, touching back on McLaren. They've been insane. They've got it right. They've got the strategy perfect. They've got the car perfect. I'll say they have the strategy perfect, but in my opinion, on this Dutch Grand Prix, they left Oscar Piastri out there a little bit too long. But they should have
double stacked. That first pit stop should have been a double stack.
Yeah, I mean, when we saw back in the day when Mercedes was dominating, we would see double stacks all the time from them. Not as many for Red Bull, even though they have the fastest pit stop team, which is kind of odd. But I would like to see some double stacks. That would be cool. Might be conflicting. I don't know. But they left Oscar Piastri out there for like 3 or 4 laps after Lando pit. And it kind of left them. I mean, I saw what they were trying to do. They were trying to give him fresher tires at the end of the race to make a last minute push. That didn't really work as he finishes 4th off of the podium. But McLaren, man, they have been spectacular. Zach Brown celebrating afterwards, well deserved. Lando Norris, that's the last point that I wanted to make because we talked about this before we pressed record. Lando Norris went bonkers when he won his first race in Miami. And there's been a lot of talks that over the summer break, he spent his time like really dialing it in and trying to get into that mentality that's well needed to be at the top. He won this race. He didn't go crazy. After the race, he didn't jump out of this car and sprint into his guy's arms or anything. No, he walked over and like shook their hands, patted him on the back a couple times, shook Max's hand, acknowledged that Oscar exists, and that was about it. That's all we saw from Lando Norris. See, I mean, his first win, he jumped out of the car, sprinted into the McLaren guy's arms, leaped all the way up. He had his helmet off. He was all smiles, all happiness. And this one, it looked like straight business.
My thoughts on that are, we see this from actually a lot of the drivers where they have this kind of bubbly personality and they're the new guy. And, we didn't really see that from Max. Max was kind of always down to business. But we saw it from Charles. We still see it from George when he got disqualified from that race. He lost his mind.
Happy.
But I think that kind of fades after a while, and I attribute that to 2 things. One being that Lando's not the new guy anymore. He's been around for a while. This is kind of where I think he feels he should be now, and so that's settling in. He got his first race win, go crazy, but now it's like, this is where I should be. The second point is, it's all business at McLaren. They now have the best car on the grid. I don't know if anybody could debate that. I believe that their car is better than Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes outright. And he's looking at a championship battle with both Max for the drivers, which he really needs to buckle down and win races in order to even, make a play at. And he sees a more reasonable constructors championship for his team. And so I think as soon as he won that race, his mind's in Italy. His mind's in the next track. His mind is, I got to get this car back to I got to get back in the simulator. I got to get this car back to the garage. We've got to fix X, Y, and Z, because he knows what's on the line now. Whereas this season, or his first win, that wasn't the case. It was, oh, I won a race. Now it's, I'm in a championship battle with Max Verstappen and Red Bull. Let's go.
I think it's exactly that. I think he's got the drivers' championship on the mind, and I think he wants it this year. I don't think he wants to wait for next year.
There's a lot of questions. You never carry over the same performance year to year. Things always change. You don't know who's going to come out with a better car than you next year. Right now, you have the best car and one of the top 3 or 4 drivers in the sport. Go win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Finishing it up, our predictions, absolutely terrible. Don't even want to touch on them, really, because it's kind of embarrassing, as I had him finishing third.
I went Max, Oscar, George. You went Max, Lando, Lewis. Yeah, you got
At least
2.
I got 2 of the top drivers, or 2 of the people correct, just wrong order.
Yeah. I only got even just one of the people right, and he was even out of place. All right, guys, let us know in the comments. I want to do a funny one this week. Will Checo win at least 6 of the final 9 races? I think he might.
Guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. It'll help us a lot in building our channel. Other than that, I don't think I have any other questions. I'll give you the funny one for this one. So hope you guys enjoy the content, and we'll see you back for the next one.
We'll see you.
Bye, guys.